After working as a divorce lawyer for more than 20 years, I've noticed something interesting. Most divorces don't happen suddenly. Long before a marriage ends, there are small warning signs that many people ignore. I once worked with a woman who told me she never saw her divorce coming, but when we looked back at the last 2 years of her marriage, the signs were there the entire time. Today, I want to share that story with you. Because if you understand these warning signs early, you might recognize when a marriage is slowly moving toward divorce. A few years ago, a woman named Melissa walked into my office for the first time. She looked exhausted, like someone who had spent months trying to understand something that no longer made sense. Melissa had been married to her husband David for 11 years. For most of that time, their relationship had been stable. They had a comfortable home, steady careers, and a routine that many couples eventually fall into after years together. There was no major conflict, no dramatic fights. But about 2 years before the divorce, Melissa started noticing something strange. At first, it seemed small. David stopped talking. That might sound simple, but communication is one of the most important parts of a healthy marriage. When Melissa tried to tell him about her day, he often responded with short answers like, "Okay," or "That's good." Sometimes he would simply nod while looking at his phone. At first, Melissa assumed he was just tired from work. But over time, their conversations slowly disappeared, and that was the first warning sign. When communication fades in a marriage, emotional distance often follows. The second sign appeared a few months later. David became extremely protective of his phone. Before, he would leave it on the kitchen table or on the couch without thinking twice. But suddenly, he started keeping it with him all the time. If a message appeared while Melissa was nearby, he would quickly flip the phone over so the screen couldn't be seen. At night, he began taking the phone with him into the bathroom or the bedroom. Melissa told me that at first she felt guilty for even noticing. After all, trust is supposed to exist in a marriage. But deep down, she knew something had changed. Then came the third sign. David started spending more and more time away from home. At first, it was work meetings. Then it was late dinners with coworkers. Sometimes he said he needed time alone to clear his mind. Melissa tried to be supportive. She believed giving her husband space might help whatever stress he was dealing with. But what she didn't realize at the time was that these three signs often appear together in marriages that are slowly falling apart. Less communication, more secrecy, more distance. By the time Melissa recognized what was happening, the marriage she believed was stable had already begun quietly drifting towards something much more serious. And unfortunately, the next signs would reveal that the situation was far worse than she ever expected. When Melissa looked back at her marriage later, she told me something very important. The first three signs made her uncomfortable, but they didn't feel like proof of anything. Many couples go through periods where communication fades or schedules become busy. So Melissa continued trying to believe that things would eventually return to normal. But then the fourth sign appeared. And this one was much harder to ignore. David began criticizing Melissa constantly. At first, the comments seemed small. He complained about how she managed the house. He criticized the way she spoke to him during conversations. Sometimes he even made sarcastic remarks about things she had done for years without any issue. Melissa described it as if the man she had known for more than a decade had suddenly started looking at her through a completely different lens. Nothing she did seemed good enough anymore, and this behavior confused her deeply because in many failing marriages, something unexpected begins to happen. Instead of discussing problems honestly, one partner begins creating emotional distance by pointing out flaws in the other person. Looking back, this was the fourth warning sign, constant criticism. Then came the fifth sign, and this one was the moment Melissa began to feel real fear about her marriage. One evening, David told her he needed to attend a late business meeting. Melissa didn't question it, but later that night, she received a message from one of her friends who happened to be downtown. The message was simple. "Hey, I think I just saw David at a restaurant. I thought he said he was working tonight?" Melissa stared at the message for several seconds. Her first instinct was to defend him. Maybe her friend was mistaken. Maybe David had finished his meeting early and decided to grab dinner. But the doubt had already begun growing inside her. When David returned home later that night, Melissa casually asked how the meeting had gone. He immediately answered, "It was long. I'm exhausted." The response came too quickly, almost like it had already been prepared. Melissa told me that was the moment something changed in her mind. For the first time, she began to wonder if her husband was hiding something. Still, she didn't accuse him. Instead, she started quietly paying attention, listening more carefully, watching small details she had once ignored. Because by this point, the pattern had become difficult to deny. Less communication, more secrecy, more distance, constant criticism. And now, possible lies. But what Melissa still didn't know was that the final two signs would reveal something far more painful than she ever imagined. And when the truth finally came out, her entire understanding of the past 11 years would change forever. By the time Melissa noticed the fifth warning sign, the quiet doubt inside her mind had already started to grow. But like many people in long marriages, she still hoped she was wrong. She hoped there was some simple explanation for everything that had been happening. Unfortunately, the next two signs made that hope much harder to hold on to. The sixth sign appeared in a way Melissa never expected. David suddenly began talking about independence. At first, the conversation seemed casual. He mentioned how people sometimes lose themselves in long relationships. He talked about friends who had rediscovered their freedom after major life changes. Melissa found those conversations strange. For years, David had always spoken about their marriage as a partnership, but now his words sounded different, almost as if he was preparing himself for a life that didn't include her. Melissa told me that those conversations left her feeling uneasy, but the seventh and final sign was the moment everything finally became clear. One evening, David came home later than usual. He seemed distracted and unusually quiet. Melissa noticed that he avoided eye contact during dinner. Finally, after several minutes of silence, he said something she had never expected to hear. He told her he wasn't happy anymore. The words felt sudden, but in reality, they had been building for months. David explained that he felt emotionally disconnected and wanted to figure out his life. At first, Melissa thought this meant counseling or time apart. But then David said something that confirmed her deepest fear. He told her he wanted a divorce. When Melissa finished telling me this story in my office, she said something that stayed with me. She said that the divorce itself didn't shock her as much as she expected, because by the time it happened, the signs had already prepared her for it. When we reviewed the timeline together, the pattern was clear. The first sign had been the disappearance of communication. Then came secrecy with his phone. Then distance from the home. After that, constant criticism. Then possible lies about where he was spending his time. Next came conversations about independence. And finally, the moment when he admitted he no longer wanted the marriage. 7 warning signs, each one small on its own. But together, they told a story Melissa hadn't wanted to see. Over the next several months, we worked through the legal process of ending the marriage. And before the case was finished, Melissa told me something very important. She said that if she had understood these warning signs earlier, she might have confronted the problems before they grew too large to repair. In my years as a divorce lawyer, I've learned that most marriages don't collapse overnight. They slowly weaken through small changes that often go unnoticed. That's why understanding these signs can be so important. Because sometimes recognizing the warning signals early can give people the chance to save a relationship before it reaches the point where divorce becomes the only option.